Okay, today we're going to be talking about the backyard orchard. Um, some things to know about fruit trees. The most important thing is that they don't have to get big. So we're finding out now that the most productive size in an orchard for a fruit tree to be, even in a commercial orchard, about 5 or 6 foot across. So all the orchards are training the trees to be smaller and they're planting more, which is great news for the homeowner because if your fruit tree only takes up 5 or 6 foot of space, you can cram a whole lot more into your garden and have a lot more variety. And you don't have to worry about, like if you have a larger fruit tree, 20-foot fruit tree, and it's making 500 fruit at one time, then the ground just gets littered with all these leftover fruits. It's a mess. Whereas if your trees are only 5 foot across, you can eat all that. Your family can eat all that on the tree. So it's much less of a mess. It's a little more work pruning-wise, at least initially. But generally, fruit trees, if they're trained for several years, they start to stay the size that you want. Now, the other thing to know about is about our county. So in Orange County, which is roughly, say, this shape, has some major rivers running through it. So there's the Santa Ana River that does kind of something like this. And then there's the San Juan Creek, which is down at the south end, something like this. And those are the coldest winter spots of Orange County now. So for a lot of the fruit trees, well, stone fruit, which are apricots, cherries, nectarines, peaches, plums, pluots, pleuries, apriums, and pears, all have what is called a minimum chill requirement for production. We generally say MCR for short, minimum chill requirement. And on those trees, every flower bud on there needs to experience a certain amount of cold in the winter to develop properly, bloom properly, and fruit properly. If they don't get it, you get no fruit, or you get a very poor crop. The rest of the fruit trees don't have to have it that we know of. Now there's other fruit trees that we don't carry. Almonds are in the stone fruit family too, and then a lot of nuts, walnuts, pecans do need it. They're not that important here, but walnuts and pecans need a chill. Well, actually we haven't confirmed that because those have produced in this area very well without much cold. So we know stone fruits definitely and the pears definitely need a chill. Apples we thought needed a chill, but now that they're grown around the world throughout the tropics, apparently they don't need it. It's not one of their most important things. So in Orange County, so we've got the rivers there, and then we've got some hills back in these areas. Something like that. The coldest winter areas in Orange County tend to be along the riverbeds and in the canyons. So the cold air in the wintertime doesn't stay on these mountains very well, or the hills very well. The cold air is heavier than warm air, so it drops to the low areas, which are the riverbeds. Now, of course, there's Aliso Creek, which runs kind of through here, and then there's Laguna Canyon, which is kind of in here. I mean, there's a lot of canyons and creek beds throughout Orange County, but those are your coldest winter areas. So they know that plums and peaches, the stone fruit, have done best in these areas of Orange County, all along the rivers and in the low-lying areas. This area is not bad, but Fountain Valley, Garden Grove, a little bit flatter in here is even better. So the cold air just sits on these areas in the wintertime in the mornings. Hills, it drains off. So all the avocado orchards, which are more frost tender, are planted in the foothills. They're not planted in the low spots. Now the record cold for Orange County was 1990. The riverbeds like San Juan Creek, one of our friends who had an orchard down there said they hit 15 degrees for about 4 or 5 hours. And I remember 1990, we had puddles in our nursery, solid ice that thick. They didn't unfreeze until afternoon. It was ice until afternoon. So those 1990 is the record cold for the area. 23 for most of this area, 23 degrees. And that froze some of the younger avocado trees down to the dirt. We'd lost those. So fortunately, the ground doesn't get it that cold. So a lot of the trees in the ground were saved by that. And generally, if your trunks are this big around, the wood is pretty insulating, so it kept those trees alive too. And in fact, canopies of trees create their own little environment underneath them. It keeps them warmer at night. So, but certainly that was the coldest we've been. But these trees do want the cold, stone fruits and pears, and generally they do best in the low-lying areas of Orange County. Now, we're always finding new stone fruits and pears that don't need much chill. So for the hill areas, you've got to be careful and get the right ones, even in the low-lying areas, because there's plenty of peaches. So around here, figure you're getting at least 300 hours here, maybe 200 hours in the hills, 400 hours right along the creek beds of temperature. Okay, the temperatures we need that the flower buds respond to is 34 to about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Now there's a lot of different models. The University of California, for the most part, has used a real simple model, which we don't think is very accurate for our area, where they tell you that between here's 50, 30, 40, 50, that you get 1 hour of chill for every hour spent between 34 and 45 degrees, and nothing below and beyond and below or above that, which nothing, you know, another scientist or professor from another college says nothing is a straight line like that. Everything's a bell curve or a curve. So what they're saying is it's more like this. In fact, they said what we've read recently is that you get the most chill at around 44 degrees. You get your maximum chill. Over 1 hour of chill for every hour spent at 44 degrees. So that's, you know, in fact, last night we were, down in the high 40s. Yes.
You didn't say the chill factor between Aliso Creek and Laguna Canyon.
Laguna Canyon's cold. You probably get 400 hours in there. They've always grown cherries in Laguna Canyon. We know customers who've grown cherries for decades in there. So the steeper the canyon, the colder it gets at the bottom, and the warmer it is at the top. So, you know, right down here might be 400 hours, but up on the hill next to it might be 200 or even less. So you can grow your bananas up at the top of the hill and your cherries at the bottom. I mean, a good friend of mine who lived down south near one of the rivers and near Oceanside said that their property drops 50 foot, 20-degree difference between top and bottom at night in the wintertime. Because their bottom of the property is on a riverbed, the top is on a hill. And they said it's that dramatic between top and bottom. So a huge difference where you place the plant, you know, where you live and the topography of your your yard even, because the cold air will slide down a slope, and anything that captures that air coming down the cold builds up behind like walls. The cold air will just sit behind a wall and not move.
How much time does a typical stone fruit, or does it depend fruit by fruit?
Yeah, there's
how many
all.
hours?
Yeah, the lowest, like on peaches, which have probably the biggest range, there are some peaches that require about 100 hours of chill, especially the ones that were developed for Florida. And there's others that need 1,000 hours of chill. So, I mean, we're good with things usually below 300, but the last 5 years we haven't even gotten that. We've gotten like 250, 200. In fact, University of California said one of those years we had 80. Well, we know it wasn't 80 because everything that needed about 200 still fruited. Their calculations are not good with the method they use, because if you can get chill all the way to about, well, it's a Utah model. Says you can get chill from about 34 degrees all the way to 55. You get less chill at either end, and most chill in the middle, or most chill at around 44. But you still get chill up to 55, and then you lose chill. You get negative chill when you get above 60. But they're still figuring things out. They said, well, if you get 200 hours of chill one week, and then you lose 100 hours the next. There are certain points of development of the flower bud. They say that once they're done, and you can't go backwards too far. So we're still trying to figure that part out, because some years it's like, now the one thing to know is that once you hit your chill, so if a plant needs 200 hours of chill, and we get all that in 2 weeks, and then it warms up, you're not losing your chill, the plant just wakes up. Once you reach that chill point, where the minimum chill requirement, it's ready to go. The next heat wave, it blooms. So, some of the fruit, that's one of the problems we have. Some of the stuff from Florida would start blooming in late December because it didn't need much chill. So it was ready to go in late December, and the fruit was ripening in April, and it wasn't very good because we're still cool in April, whereas Florida is already 90 degrees. A lot of the stuff from Florida doesn't work here because of that problem. It's just too early. So you do have to watch out. The low chill, late ripening stuff is what we like. For a lot of the fruits, the more sun, the more heat you get, the better the flavor. And that's been like the holy grail of stone fruits, is to find something that's low chill but doesn't ripen too soon. You want it to ripen late. So
what would that type of fruit would that entail then?
well, most of the stuff, like on peaches, it's August Pride. But there's some plums that don't need much chill to ripen in August. So
Peachy King, it's about 200 or 300 hours for chill for you.
we're still not sure. It did bloom this last year in fruit. So this last year we had about 200 and we think about 270. And the Peachy Kings woke up, at least in Fullerton, they woke up fine, bloomed, made their crop in July or June, a little early this year. No, I think it was a little late. We had a weird year this year because the coldest month was actually March. And usually if it's March, it doesn't work because it's already spring, but it actually counted pretty good. We actually had some decent crops in a lot of things. So, I mean, this year was really weird. The people in Central Valley said they've never seen a year like that, where it was 17 degrees in March. Hit 17, a low of 17 in March. They said their fruit trees were like 6 weeks behind schedule because of that. And they had weird crops all summer long because the fruit tree, it was already 80, 90 degrees, and the fruit trees weren't ready yet. So anyway, depending where you live, depends on which fruit you can pick. I've had customers along the Santa Ana River that grow things that I've never even imagined would grow here. Certain walnuts and pears, like Bartlett pear. which needs, I think, 400 and something hours of chill, and they're growing them along the Santa Ana River. So that the bigger the river, because the cold air from all the mountains back here drains down the Santa Ana River. So that is a very, very cool spot in the wintertime. Not necessarily cold, cold, but just cool all day because of the drainage from the mountains. Now, if you get our emails, you've been noticing too, we've been talking about the approaching ice age. We'll see what happens. But we've gone through. But anyway, we've gone through cycles in the past. So the early 80s, I started growing fruit trees in the early 80s. No chill. We had 4 or 5 winters in a row where we threw away peaches and plums because they wouldn't wake up. No chill, wouldn't even wake up. We were a little bit too quick. We didn't know that if they didn't wake up by July that they were actually still alive. So now we know, because of the last 5 years, we know that, yeah, if we don't get enough chill, they wake up in August. That's how late they wake up. They finally leaf out in August, maybe 1/10 the normal growth, and they will do their thing, get their leaves and stay alive. But back in the early 80s, we were just tossing those trees. They said, well, haven't woke up in June, July, throw them away. So we're throwing away a whole bunch of fruit trees in those days. And then in the late 80s, boy, we were cold. Late 80s, early 90s, 35 degrees every night in the winter. We went through some really cool spells, and then the 90s were not bad, early 2000s not bad, but the last 5 years haven't had much cold at all. But now they're saying, some of the scientists are saying the next 5 years we're going to go really cold. And Canada has certainly been hit this year. They said they lost $7 billion worth of grain crops because it got too cold for them to harvest them too soon. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, so in your own garden, you have some options too. First house I lived at, I planted everything in crops and rows like a farm. I did my fruit trees 7 foot apart. Had about 80 fruit trees in my backyard. It works. It's not real, it looks, you do look like a farm when you do that. So Dave Wilson gives you other options. So Dave Wilson Nursery, davewilson.com is their website. And they are the largest supplier of largest fruit tree nursery in the United States as far as I know. They send more fruit trees across the country. And they're up Hickman, California, up near Fresno. So they did a lot of research on backyard orchards. So they know in fruit orchards how to do it. But they, in the last 20, 25 years, they wanted to promote more home orchards. So they did a lot of research there. They said you can get fruit trees as close as 3 feet apart in a row and maintain them as a hedge. To me, I tried 3 foot with citrus. It's a little tight. I'd go 4 feet, but they're saying 3 feet can be done. And they also mentioned the other methods that they use. So if you want to make your yard more aesthetically pleasing and not have, just look like a farm, what we did our last house, we followed one of their other things where you plant up to 5 fruit trees in the space of 1. And it's nice if they're all the same kind of fruit tree. It looks better. So if you have 5 apples planted, say, 18 to 24 inches apart, and just grow it as 1 tree, about 8 foot across, that also helps with your, if this was just 1 variety of apple tree here, that's about 400 fruit ripening over about a month. Most apples, the harvest time is about a month. Maybe a month and a half. That's still too many apples for you to eat, but if you have 5 different apple varieties in here, and the earliest apples ripen in June, the last ones ripen in the next year, and say we'll hang on till February, you can eat all that. You pick the right varieties of apples, Apples probably have the longest range of ripening periods of any fruit tree, maybe except for citrus. But you can have what looks like one apple tree, but pick sectors of it. Now, when you plant them, they do mention keep the trees upright. Don't tilt them out. The first time I did that, I tilted them out. Of course, they just keep tilting when they get the fruit load. They just keep on going. So we had a time together. Didn't really hurt them though. 20 years later, they're still tied together. They're still doing fine. So, but anyway, they say plant up to 5 upright. Now, the old method of pruning fruit trees was to plant them and cut them off at knee height, about 18 inches, and then you'll get this nice shape like this. A lot of the new orchards aren't doing this at all anymore. Now, with peaches, they do still, some nurseries, some farms still do that, but a lot of places, they're just going with a single stem, which used to be a no-no. Used to be, you want that open vase shape. Well, they found that the form of fruit tree that's the most productive is a dome, because it has the most surface area. In the old days, it was a vase. They thought vase shape was the most productive form, but now they know it's the exact opposite. It's the dome form that got the most, it makes sense, most surface area on a dome. So now they're saying, train your trees like this, like Christmas tree. And the goal is to have as few vertical stems as possible, the most horizontal, because the horizontal stems capture the sunlight, they make the fruit. The vertical stems don't fruit. Now, it is true that the old peach trees, when they did this, essentially it was this on each tree, on each branch. So essentially it was like they had 16 trees all connected to one trunk. Uprights, everything else horizontal on it. But this is your goal here, is to have say a 5 foot wide. They said the reason why 5 foot's the maximum width, ideally, I mean, a lot of orchards aren't ideal, is because sunlight can't get through more than about 30 inches of foliage. So if you make it bigger than 5 feet, you've got a section in the middle of your tree that's non-productive. 5 foot total width. So 30 inches of foliage is as far as the sunlight normally goes in. So 30 inches on 2 sides, that gives you 5 foot of width. Yes.
If you buy a width, like a 4 or 5 foot width, how do you get it to, what do you do to help it branch?
That's a good question. So we get a lot of fruit trees in bare root that actually have a decent structure already. And you just keep with that. But if you don't, what they do in orchards, let me turn the page here. So they say if you start off with a whip, then you just top it at where you want your first tier of branches. So if you want it to start at 1 foot, well, that's too low, maybe 2 foot off the ground, cut it there, train one to continue going up and all the rest to go out. Because usually when you top that little thing, you'll get about 4 or 5 branches. We'll train the one to go up and train the rest to go out to the side. And then where you want your next tier, which in Canada, you have to do this, it's once a year, you do the topping. Southern California, where our growing season's so long, you might be able to get your whole tree trained within 1 year. So you get another couple feet, top it again, get another set of branches, and then train one to go up again. And then later on, if you get 2 more feet of growth, top it again, and then you'll get a whole bunch of branches, train one to continue going up. So you just kind of spend your time doing that. But we are getting a lot more bare root trees now that have decent side branching. Yes.
With one of my fluids, it had a second growth come up, and then it really went crazy on the lower part of the growth, and so I trimmed a couple of those, pruned those back, but I left some of it, but then the rest of it's still kind of challenged to grow more? Should I leave the lower part and just let it grow as is?
Mhm.
That's where the growth is coming from?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, um, they say in orchards that you don't want any side branch to be more than 2/3 the size of the trunk. Otherwise, all the energy goes that way. And if it is, you really cut that thing short, force it to regrow, and hopefully it'll stay skinnier. Because sometimes, yeah, you get a side branch, it just takes over,
Yeah.
and not much you can do about it. So just cut it. Don't cut it off, but cut it short.
Okay.
So let it regrow.
I'm new to this, I'm not quite sure. If you've got 4 or 5 plants in the same hole, each one needs to grow.
Well, then you just use each trunk as one. Just do one set of branches on it. Say,
Each side has
right. So this is how they typically train apple trees, but now they're starting to do peach trees this way rather than have them have more than one trunk. I mean, in California, the most common way to see peach trees now is just going to two verticals. But Canada, they're so used to growing apples this way, they do their peach trees that way too, and I don't see any problem with that at all. Do all the fruit trees the same. They call this a spindle shape.
So how do you do your trees?
Well, the last time I started my peach trees was 20 years ago, and we didn't have all this information back then.
You've done them in that shape.
I just let them go. I didn't know enough. Well, see, Dave Wilson, they want to make it simple for their customers, so all they say is, just hack the tree back to the height you want to pick it in summer. It doesn't matter how you do it. None of this branching matters at all. As long as you do your pruning in summer, it'll still fruit on what has leaves on it at that point. But if you want to be more accurate and do it the way the orchards do it, this is how they're doing it. So forming, vertical stem, horizontal tiers. So the more you can keep to this, I mean, if your tree has 2 trunks and you don't get rid of one, yeah, you can work with 2 trunks. Just know what your goals are, is to have most of the other branching horizontal. So now with a lot of fruit trees, well, apricots and plums, they just say as long as the branch, because they don't it's hard to make them do horizontal. So apricots and plums, they said, well, just try to keep it 45 degrees, because they don't like to be horizontal that much. But for apples, peaches, a lot of the fruit trees, if you can, more horizontal these are, the better. I mean, citrus and avocados, nobody pays attention to that too much. They just hedge them. Although in Japan, because greenhouse space is limited, they really watch the branching of their avocados, we know. Because it's, in Japan, every avocado is worth about $10. So they really have to make sure, and they have to grow them in greenhouses, so they have to make sure that it's optimal fruiting conditions. So they say they're training those things just like bonsai plants. So. Okay, so most fruit trees you can fall something similar to that. And last week we talked about the intricacies of doing peaches. We'll do that again when we do another peach class in about a month or so. So, because peaches and nectarines are really, there's a lot of stuff to know. Now, in a typical yard, the other thing to know is that there are microclimates in a garden. And if north is, say, well, the sun's coming in, this is south over here, and the sun's coming from this side. In a yard, this will be your hottest sides on the south sides of walls. And in the wintertime, the north sides of walls will be your coolest spots. So citrus, avocados would rather be on the south sides of things. And if you have a plum or a peach that doesn't get enough chill, then they definitely want to be on the north side in the wintertime. So as long as you're not right up underneath the eaves, so say if you had a plum tree here that needed 300 hours of chill, this time of year, you know how low the angle of the sun is. It doesn't, if you have a 2-story house, this is all in the shade all winter long. And that really, it may be a difference of 4 or 5 degrees at night, and then the next day also cooler here than this side. In fact, this side might be 10 degrees difference because it's going to be 5 or 6 degrees hotter than normal on the south side. And as long as you get the sun on this tree while it's fruiting. So on most fruit trees, they said the last week before the fruit's picked makes the biggest difference on the sunlight. If it's cloudy, the last 4 days before something's picked, it's pretty bland. But if it's sunny the last 4 days, or if you have sun on it right when fruit's ripening, that's when you get your best quality fruit. So in the summertime, that shadow doesn't come much more than 2 or 3 feet beyond the edge of the building. And if you have a fruit tree there within, say, 10 foot out from the building, it's in full sun, you get some pretty good fruit. So if you have trees that need more chill, north sides of walls, evergreen trees, the house, that really helps.
Ask that question.
Sure.
You've got 4 or 5 plants in the hole. How much area, let's say how much area do you need around that hole for this tree? 10, 15?
Well, the question was, if you plant 4 or 5 in a group. Now, in my house, we normally gave them about an 8 to 10 foot wide area total. So they were growing similar to what you do on one tree. Say one tree, 10 foot wide, is a good size to work with, but this drops the number of fruit for each tree or each variety down to maybe below 100. Whereas before you got 300, 400 fruit on that one tree. But yeah, but you can be as narrow as 6 feet. But it's a little easier to work with about 8 foot, I think.
When's the best time of year to do the pruning for fruit trees?
Most of the heavy pruning is done in the winter,
Okay, like now?
but we also do a lot in summer. So most fruit trees in spring and summer, they are programmed just to grow. And if they're growing like 10 foot tall and you want to be that tall, just at that point cut it down to 7 feet. You're not cutting off any potential fruiting wood yet. But once fall starts, most of the especially the stone fruit, they just stop growing. And when fall hits, when the days become shorter and nights, they just stop growing. And whatever foliage is there captures the sunlight for next year's fruiting. So you want your trees to be short. The height you want them to fruit by fall. And then in the winter you do your thinning out and all that stuff. So, but try to get the fruit trees down in height, because if you left the branch 10 foot tall all fall, your best flower buds are 10 foot up. Then you cut it down to 7 foot to picking height in the winter, you just lost your best fruiting wood. But if you had cut it down in early September to 7 foot, your best flowering wood is now at 7 foot, not at 10 foot, because it's not there. So. Anytime you can get them now, it's with the stone fruits and all your deciduous fruit trees. In the middle of winter, we have our best selection, so that makes it better than later on. Otherwise, if I had my best selection in summer in containers, there's no problem with that. I mean, there's really no problem as long as you're watering properly. Now, the nice thing about bare root is it's never been in a pot, so we get plants in bare root, the bare fruit trees come in, they've never been in a pot, so there's no foreign soil around their roots. You put them right into the ground in your own native soil, and they're fine with that. So you talk a bit about dirt. The majority of fruit trees, you should just put in the dirt in your own soil the way it is, and don't amend it at all. Especially if you buy the plants from us. Now, if you buy the plants from someone else, or we buy them in from someone else, and they're in this real strange compost type soil, which everybody uses, then you've got some troubles, because that stuff will rot if it doesn't, if the soil is, especially if the soil is heavy, clay-like, those compost things tend to rot. So the problem we have right now is we can't sell citrus. We're in a citrus quarantine zone. You can bring citrus into this area of Orange County. You can't move it out because of a certain disease in the area, so we can't sell it. You can buy it somewhere else and bring it in, though. You're supposed to buy within the county, so you have to go south or west to get it. You're not supposed to buy stuff in Riverside and bring it to Orange County, but there's no plant police between here and there, so it's not that big a deal. But the problem we have is that there's no retail citrus grown in what we would consider to be good soil. So like we started making our own potting soils 25 years ago because we found out that none of the potting soils that are made work at all. I mean, potting soil in general, even the EPA's description's weird. So the EPA controls what we can sell as potting soil. Well, their definition of potting soil is recycled wood products, which is, so most potting soils, the main ingredient, and some potting soils, the only ingredient is a ground up dead tree. Take fir trees, grind them up, whatever the mills cannot sell, they grind them up, let them compost for a while, which means that they let them rot for a while, and then they throw them in a bag and says, grow your plants in this. Well, plants don't grow in dead trees. It's not even their home. The reasoning behind why they do is because the college professor says, well, it is all the nutrition the plants need. Well, it's like saying, well, these dead people with all nutrition, same nutrition as in your body, make them your house. Well, that's not where we live either. You get diseased if you try to live in dead people. And so in nature, yeah, the dead tree is not the home for plants, it's the home for mushrooms. But for some reason, in the industry, they've left out one step. The dead trees are eaten by mushrooms. The mushrooms release the nutrients back to the plants. The plants don't live in the dead trees. They can't. But here they're forcing everybody to do that. They said, this is how you make potting soil. In fact, the whole industry is growing their plants, it seems, in ground up wood as the main material because they were told to do that by the universities. So I can't blame all the universities. Some universities are smarter than that, but apparently the main horticulture nurseries have educated a whole set of, my advantage is that my dad was a nurseryman, and they grew plants in real dirt. Did I bring a sample up? Nope. This sandy soil. This is where we grew our plants and never had a problem with overwatering. But he was told that he had to grow his plants in ground up compost. So we tried that for 10 years, lost a lot of stuff, figured it out by the mid-90s, we figured it out, said, this compost isn't working. Went back, started making our own soil without any ground up wood in there, and then have gone on from there. But everyone else is still trying to grow their plants in ground up dead trees. And they're so sensitive to rotting because that's what ground up wood does. When you get it wet, it rots. And it's taking compost eats up dead stuff, and it also eats up live stuff. That's what it does. There's no, we've been arguing, well, this is a couple lectures, this is next week's lecture, but we've been arguing with compost people. I said, well, we only sell finished compost. I said, well, you sell carbon dioxide and water? Because that's what wood turns into when it's finished decomposing. Otherwise, it's still decomposing, and it still causes things to rot within it. So all the citrus and avocados that we don't grow are in compost. And if you put them in your home and you water them the way they like to be watered, they'll start turning yellow, and then you'll be blamed for overwatering the trees. Well, it's not your fault. And almost any fruit tree you buy from anyone else is in the same boat. It's either in ground up bark or ground up wood of some sort. And there's some things that are immune to rotting. It seems like fig trees, pomegranates, apples seem to almost immune to that. It affects them, but not fatally. But you get a lot of stone fruits, avocado, citrus, papayas. If they're in moist soil with compost, they just turn yellow. They're losing their roots real fast. So anyway,
Which one would you recommend for a citrus to put on top of in the ground just to get a little boost, a little fertilizer?
Well, so okay, well, back to the note about citrus. So if you buy citrus somewhere else, what we would do when we carried them a year ago, we got quarantined last year, but when we carried them, first thing we do is knock all the dirt off the roots. The method we use will show in next week, but knock it all off, switch it to our top pot, water, put it back in the pot, water it real thoroughly. Need to shade it at least part of the day for 2 weeks. Takes plants 2 weeks to recover from that root shock. We never lost a single citrus doing that. Some of the avocados that did that with went down to no leaves. They dropped all the leaves, but none of them died. They all made it back. So we feel pretty comfortable about removing soil on plants. There's certain plants that don't put up with it. Gardenias are real tricky, and some of the elephant ears are too. But most of the fruit trees, fortunately, are pretty tough guys. So anyway, our top pot's a good soil substitute, either for the ground or for a container. Our acid mix we usually use on things that need more acidity. Blueberries, apples actually like that a lot too. So certain things need more acid, we use in that, but most plants we'll put in our top pot. So this is like the ground, our top pot is primarily quartz. So sand, silt, and clay are mostly quartz. When lightning hits the ground, you get glass. So it's quartz. So we try to make a version of soil that's lighter, because if this was real dirt in here, it'd be about 120 pounds. This is still heavy enough. It's about 40, but it's a lot lighter than real dirt. We do put peat moss in there. Peat moss is a dead plant, but it's been dead so long and it's not related to anything we're trying to grow, so it doesn't really decompose at any fast rate. It doesn't seem to cause trouble. And basically, one way to check your potting soil to see if it can cause trouble or not, you just throw it in a bucket of water. If it doesn't smell in a week, it's fine. Our stuff, if you throw it in water, it doesn't smell because it's not decomposing very fast. But if most potting soils, you put them in a bucket of water, and about 3 days later, it smells like a sewer because it's decomposing anaerobically in the water, and it takes all the oxygen out of the water, and then things go south very quickly.
So if you have clay soil, you're saying you just still put the plant right in the soil?
Right, clay is not poisonous unless there's compost mixed in with it.
Okay.
So we started having trouble with clay in the 80s when we started adding more compost to it, because clay has very slow air movement through it. So roots need to breathe oxygen, and if you put too much compost in it, the compost is using up all the oxygen, and the roots can't breathe, they rot. But if there's no compost in the ground and you have your roots in there, they're pretty fine unless it's a low spot.
So you wouldn't want to put sand or something?
You can use sand. Sand's not very efficient. Any soil, we've been told by an agriculture agent who knows more, any clay soil in Orange County, if you mix it half volume with sand, it'll breathe just like normal soil. But that's a lot of volume. That means if you're trying to fix a foot of soil, your soil has to be a foot higher. That's a lot of sand you got to put in there. Pumice is more efficient. So all our soils contain pumice, but we also sell pure pumice. And they said if your soil, now we don't have pure clay here, but they said if you had 100% clay, and the worst in Orange County is like 50, 60%, if you made it 1/5 of the volume with pumice, it'll breathe. So you don't have to raise your soil so high by adding pumice. Pumice is like sand with holes through it. Yes.
But you're saying that it's not necessary to amend your soil. Spread the tree in the clay soil. So what's the need for the top pot, and how would you use it?
If you put a plant from a container in the ground and it's got a lot of compost in it, then you've got to make sure that the roots don't suffocate. So you can surround it with you can just dig a hole and surround it with that, and it's fine, it works. I have had a lot of landscapers who don't like to fix plants. They told me that for the last 20 years, they put a plant in the ground, they just surround it with pure sand. and it doesn't rot because it's getting enough air in there.
So is it with a bare root, is it better just to put it in native soil or to put some sand around?
No, put in native soil. So Dave Wilson Nursery, they tell their farmers, do not do anything to your soil. Just put them in there. Now, the thing you have to worry about is if you have a poor drainage area. So if you have a low spot and the water sits there and it sits there and it sits there, for initially it's okay because the water's got plenty of, water out of the tap or rainwater, plenty of oxygen in there. But if it sits there for a month and doesn't move, the roots of the plants eventually use all the oxygen up, and if it's not being renewed because the water just sitting there, then they eventually can suffocate. So you make sure there's no, you don't plant certain fruit trees in low spots. Now, apples and pears, they don't care. I believe the level of oxygen they need is something like 2 parts per million. Most plants need oxygen in the water at like 6 to 8, and in the tap water it's about that point. But pears and apples can go really low without damage. So if you have a low spot in your garden, pears and apples go there. The fruit trees that need the best drainage would be avocados. Well, let's write them down. Or need the best drainage, best aeration. Most oxygen in the soil is a better term for that. So high oxygen requirements would be, I'm not sure what the highest is, but avocado's got to be up near the top. Papaya's up there. Persimmon. Cherry. I think those are the main ones. And then the low oxygen, apples, pears, there are some stone fruit. There's a rootstock called citation rootstock. And if your if your apricot, peach, plum, nectarine are on citation, this stuff actually prefers wet clay than dry soil. But I don't know. We were promoting citation for years because we used to be near Mission Viejo or Lake Forest where there's more clay. But during the drought, all these died. They hate dried things on citation rootstock. Hate dry soil. So we're backtracking, going back to the other rootstocks that need drier soil, like Nemagard or Lovell, or the other rootstocks that need more, that can handle drier soil. We're going back toward that direction. A lot of avocados, they've done the same thing. So a lot of avocado rootstocks are meant to handle wet soil, but after the drought, they started looking for rootstocks or testing rootstocks that can handle dry soil. It's apparently dry is more common now than too wet. We'll see though. Watch what'll happen now. We'll have floods for a few decades. We'll see. Well, they're either on citation or Nemagard. They're not that. I've never lost a peach to root rot. I've lost cherries, plums, persimmons. I've never lost an avocado root rot, but cherries, plums, and persimmons were in sections of my yard. Either, back in the 80s, we didn't know about this compost thing, so we had an area, we brought in compost type soil, and I lost a lot of cherries in that, and avocados, actually. Papaya may be the worst one, because I remember in the 90s, we were growing papayas in super soil, which is compost, wood, fir bark stuff. And boy, you water them 2 days in a row, it would rot the second day. Turn yellow and just fall over. Just crazy how quick that happened. Now that we grow them in our top pot, they don't rot. You can water them twice a day, 3 times a day. They don't rot. If the oxygen level in the water is high, nothing rots. I mean, virtually anything can be grown in hydroponically. It's strange that the hydroponic industry, the cut flower industry, knows about the oxygen requirements in the water. The horticulture industry is still trying to find out why things are rotting, or they just don't bother to learn about it. So the horticultural industry has no clue about the oxygen requirements of roots, but the other major industries know what's going on. So. Okay, so when you get a bare root fruit tree, we put them in big plastic bags with butt paper around the roots. They'll be coming in about 2 weeks. I don't know. Usually they call me up a week before and ask me what day I want it. Dave Wilson is our only bare root supplier left at the moment, and they'll usually figure out when it's a good time for them to send it out. This year, Christmas is on Tuesday. Our New Year's is on Tuesday. So last year they sent it out right before New Year's Day, but this year Monday's not good enough. So we'll probably get it later that week. I don't know. They might send it out the week after Christmas. I'm not sure. The week of Christmas. So we'll see. We'll find out when they're coming in. We store them in bins full of sawdust. Now sawdust is terrible. You know, by 2 months down the road, the sawdust is starting to rot the roots of these trees. So we just do that because I'm getting too old to work with sand. We used to store all our bare roots in sand, which is the best way, but boy, it was backbreaking to dig a trench, put the trees in there, put the sand over them, pull them out. In fact, sand does rip some of the little roots off of the trees too, so the sawdust being much more gentler and lighter, as long as we get them in and out of there quickly, no issues. But if we leave them in there for 3 months, they're starting to rot in that sawdust. So, and then when you take them home, keep the plastic bags out of the sunlight. They'll store in those bags for a long time. If you know, the growers actually will store them outdoors in the sun. They just keep sprinkling them with water, and they'll hold them till about March, just that way. But we tell you, put them, put them in a plastic bag. You can put them in a bucket of water too. Set them in the shade somewhere outside. Now, if they predict we're going to go well below freezing, you've got to bring those things inside, in your garage or something, because roots freeze when they're not in the ground pretty easily. Remember in, 1990, I think it was 1990, when we had that real bad frost, we actually lost a lot of fruit trees that we had. We get in, truckloads of all these bare fruit trees, place them on the asphalt, cover them with blankets. The blankets were freezing, and the roots were freezing underneath those blankets. We actually lost some apple trees that year because of that. Apples can take it real cold as long as the roots are in the ground, but when they're underneath blankets, they can have some big trouble. So anyway, you can store them for quite a while. I've stored fruit trees till May in plastic bags. They already flowered, setting fruit in the plastic bag, and then put them in the ground. They're fine. So as long as you keep that soil moist, the roots moist and cool, they can sit quite a while. The other thing to know too, so when you plant your fruit tree, usually they're grafted, and you can see where the graft is. It's a dog leg to one side. They're usually grafted about 3 or 4 inches above the roots. But most fruit trees, that 3 or 4 inches of stem above the ground, if you sink it below the ground, they'll make it. We've done that by mistake, or sometimes they sink. As long as you keep the graft union above the soil level, you're pretty safe. Now, if you wanted to be perfect about planting this, if the sun's over here and this little dog leg sometimes gets sunburned if it's on that side. So they say if your graft is dog leg to one side, face it toward the south so the sun can't hit it. Because normally I would tell you we've never seen it burn. but this last year, 115 degrees, that would have burned that thing. You burn that part of branch that's perpendicular to the sun's rays, it just gets too hot. So face the graft to the south, or paint it white. You can do either way. So try to get the roots spread out. One thing about roots, well, if this is virgin soil, generally you don't worry about it. You just dig a hole deep enough to get that in there. Dave Wilson showed me videos of them planting fruit trees in orchards. It takes the guy like 20 seconds to dig the hole, 20 seconds to put the tree back in and fill it back in. And they'll do thousands of trees in an orchard really fast that way. But generally, it's nice to spread the roots out a bit. Don't go too far down. Most roots don't like to live below a foot. Backfill nicely. The thing you have to remember is that there is a replant syndrome. So if plants don't like to live in the same soil that a relative has lived in before. So if this was an apple tree you had here and you pulled it out, put another apple tree in there, it just won't grow in that soil twice. If it was a peach tree here, pull the peach tree out, put a new peach tree in, peach tree won't do well. If it's anything related, apricot is related to peach tree, it won't do well either. If you pull the peach tree out and put an apple tree in, no problem. The apple tree doesn't care. It just cares if a relative had died in that area. So what happens if you have a peach tree in there for a couple of years, the soil is just full, every quarter inch there's peach roots. If you pull that peach tree out, you've pulled out the big roots, but you haven't done anything about the small hair roots that are all littered through here. And it doesn't take much. It's analogous to people. If someone's murdered in your house and you don't clean up every little bit of that, you don't do too well. It may not kill you, but your body's fighting off all these diseases that are in your house because of that. So you got to do a real good cleaning. Plants are exactly the same way. You have little pieces of peach root in the ground around a peach tree, it doesn't like that at all. Even if you did this where you had an existing peach tree in the ground and you dig a hole nearby and put another peach tree there, that hole you dig cuts up the roots of that peach tree, and the new peach tree going in doesn't like it. So if you dig a hole and plant a peach tree next to an existing peach tree, you got to make sure the soil going back in this hole is something either from a distant area of your garden or the bag of our top pot, or ask to make something that doesn't have ground up peach roots in it. No, anything. In the 80s, I read articles from American Rose Society about the rose replant syndrome. And in the 90s, we learned that the University of California was doing studies in apple orchards on the apple replant syndrome. It's all the same stuff. U.S. Forest Department figured it out before anyone else. They said, yeah, unless your forest burns down, you can't plant the same things again. They won't grow. So the burning sterilizes the ground they said when you have a forest fire, the soil doesn't heat up very deeply because soil is very insulating, but you essentially sterilize the top 10 inches to 12 inches of soil when you have a bad forest fire. And since plant roots only go down about a foot, that pretty much cleans out your soil. So you have a bad forest fire, the same plants can grow back. If you don't have a bad forest fire, you get a different plant growing back. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks too. But so they say you clean out the forest by burning it. Yes.
So would an apricot and a plum be
Same roots.
different?
No, same roots. So all the stone fruit, they use the same root system. Right.
Plants, do you raise up the roots all to create a mound?
They'll grow faster if you do. So if you raise up the soil, it's higher, the soil's warmer and drains better, so the plants are going to go better if you raise it up. Now, on the replant syndrome, the studies University of California did with that is they found out that if you replace a half a cubic yard of soil, that's 3 foot wide, 1.5 foot deep, with soil from at least 20 foot away from the tree, then the new tree does actually even better than it would if you had planted it in a new orchard. So new soil in an old orchard, the tree did better than a new tree in a new orchard.
measurement, what were they?
3 foot wide, 1.5 foot deep. That's half a cubic yard, 13.5 cubic foot of soil. It's what they recommended for an orchard. They said the tree grew back to 10 foot by 10 foot very quickly with that amount of dirt. The roots went through the new soil real fast. With the old soil, they just stopped. They wouldn't grow into it. And they didn't know why that was happening. And the forest department figured it out, but the researchers couldn't figure anything out. They didn't know why they wouldn't go into the old soil. They said there's something in that old soil that the new roots didn't like. We know what it is. It's the old roots. It's the old severed roots or the old dead roots. So if you know ecology, this all makes sense. But so you can plant the same stuff over and over. Just make sure that where you ever plant the soil, you give them some new dirt around them to get them started. And the more you do, the bigger the plant can grow. But you know, if you only want a fruit tree this wide, you only need to replace maybe 4 cubic foot of soil, 2 foot wide area.
And the roots will still grow past that?
No, they won't go past it, but that might be enough. You know, this you can grow a pretty big fruit tree in this 24-inch box. This is about 4 cubic foot of soil. And you can grow a fruit tree easily 10, 12 foot high in here. So you don't need that much dirt to grow a pretty good sized fruit tree.
And how far out, if that was in the ground, the roots would grow out?
No, I mean if you grew a plant in here instead of in the ground.
Then it would just kind of curl, right?
Right. So in the ground, if you want to just do an area this same size and plant a fruit tree in fresh dirt of this dimension, you'll still get a pretty good sized tree. It may not be 10 by 10, but it'll still be a good sized tree. So it might be enough. Things in dirt don't really fall over. Dirt doesn't budge, only if they're in compost. We see a lot of trees that were growing in compost. After a year, they're doing this because the compost is sinking on them, so they just bend over. So yeah, so as far as growing containers goes, there are advantages and disadvantages to being in pots. So one advantage of being in pots is that this is hotter than the ground, especially in the wintertime. It's also a disadvantage in summer. This is hotter than the ground in the summertime. So this is usually hotter than the air by 10, 20 degrees. So in the summer, it can be lethal on some trees. Cherry trees absolutely hate it. Citrus absolutely love it. Depends on the tree. Papayas love to be in black plastic because it is hot, and they love the heat. Plumerias love the heat, but apples don't like it. But cherries just absolutely look cooked when you put them in black plastic. Yes.
I actually have a stupid question. I've got a wild cherry of some sort, but all around it is a bunch of daylilies in black plastic on top. How badly is that going to go with that? Or not at all? Okay.
Not at all.
All right, I'm good.
So, I mean, nurseries for a while experimented with using white pots, but for most year the plants wouldn't grow, so they went back to black. Because white is so cold. It stays colder, well, it's just too cold. It's colder than the ground in the wintertime. So they learned their lesson very quickly and went back to black, but they just try to make sure that the pots are shaded in the summer. But even if it's shaded, the ground temperature never gets above around here, never above about 85. Even if it's 100 degrees that day, the ground just doesn't warm up that much where the roots are. The pots are always at least as warm as the air. So it still can be a problem in a pot. Just can't, but most fruit trees are not that sensitive. So just be careful. Cherries are the worst. The other thing we know about orchards now too, so in the old days, they used to think that any weed in the ground is competing with the trees for water, for nutrients. So the old orchards, they would put weed kill all over the place. Now they just don't bother. They found out that the weeds aren't taking any water away from the trees. Plants essentially don't use a whole lot of water, but they lose it to the air. There's a certain amount of water that evaporates into the air, but they found it doesn't matter if it's a tree or a tree and some weeds. The same amount of water is evaporating into the air. So they found out, yeah, the weeds aren't using any extra water. Unless the orchard's really young, the weeds aren't really using any extra water, so they just let them grow now. And as long as they don't pull them and throw them away, the nutrients aren't going anywhere either. So as long as they just now and then hack the weeds down and leave the dead weeds there, the nutrients remain in the orchard. So they don't even worry about that part anymore. Now mulches on the ground are important. Either have some plants growing on the ground or a mulch on the ground, because bare dirt gets really hot in the summertime. And it gets cold in winter, although we don't worry about the cold here. We just don't have much cold compared to anywhere else, Kansas or Michigan. So they found out that if you have 3 inches of mulch on the ground, the soil temperature will remain at about 85 degrees, even on the hottest day in the summer. If you have bare dirt in the ground exposed to the sun, it can actually go well over 100 degrees in the soil, which will kill a lot of the roots off on your trees.
Should the mulch go right up to the bark?
Yeah, the only tree that you might not want it right on the trunk would be citrus. I mean, most of the country right now is saying don't mulch around your trunks because it causes rotting. Well, there's no one in nature that goes around doing this. Most forests, it's this deep in mulch around the trunks. In the rainforest, it's much deeper, and no one cleans it up. It's just that they're starting to see the effects of growing trees in fir bark or pine bark, whatever they're growing them in. And you put mulch on top of that, the combination of all that compost around the trees is killing them. So they think it's the bark around the trees that are the mulch they put around the tree trunks that's causing it. It's contributing to it, but it's not the only cause. So we don't worry about it. Now citrus, it is true if the trunk stays wet continuously, especially if it gets damaged at the same time, then they get this rot. So in citrus, you might want to keep it a little drier. So another point, on most fruit trees, they don't care if the trunks get wet. Citrus are the main ones. We try to keep the trunk dry. So if you have a citrus orchard, generally you would have your sprinkler things spraying outwards away from the trunk. Most other fruit trees doesn't care. You can have them spraying the trunk. But citrus, it's nice to go outwards away from it, or have a drip line around it. Now, a lot of orchards are going away from drip because they find out that a true drip system doesn't wet enough of the roots for the tree to be happy. So on citrus, they found out that you need to keep at least 40% of the area underneath the branches moist. So you still see some orchards where they have soaker loops going around underneath the tree. Try to get at least 40% of the soil moist underneath those trees. But yeah, we would think that most fruit trees want all the soil around to be moist. And again, you don't have to have the mulch down if you have, like a friend of mine's orchard, they have clover covering the ground underneath their trees.
When you plant, do you put any compost on top?
You certainly could.
Compost and then mulch?
Same. Well, usually they're the same thing. Yeah. Compost is just organic. Mulches can be rocks too, but yeah, put something on there to keep the soil moist and cool and and it does stop a lot of weed growth too. And it does provide a lot of nutrition on top of that. So nutrition-wise, generally in this area, the main two things that our soil lacks as is nitrogen and potassium. And could use a little more calcium too. So calcium is gypsum. So it's nice to put gypsum in your garden every now and then. We have enough phosphorus in the soil, so you look with fertilizers that have larger first numbers, that's your nitrogen, and larger, the middle number is phosphorus. Again, we have enough phosphorus in the ground around here. So the last number would be the potassium. In fact, kind of a neat thing that we finally saw in a agricultural, some literature is what percentage of the nutrients that all farms shoot for. So if you go down the list, there's nitrogen, phosphorus, but potassium is a K, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, iron, let's see, magnesium, what's the other one? Manganese, boron, zinc, copper, chlorine, nickel, and molybdenum. So that's your minerals that all plants need. Now, if you use an organic source, especially the seed meals are wonderful because a seed's got to have everything the plant needs in the right amounts. So all the seed meals, neem seed meal, cotton seed meal, they're pretty accurate. Cornmeal, they're pretty accurate because that's what the plant needs. It's what's in that seed. So, but anyway, if you say, we'll start with nitrogen 100%, what are the amounts of the other nutrients that you actually need? 16% phosphorus, 62% potassium. So besides nitrogen, that's the next big one is potassium. Sulfur's 9, manganese is 10, calcium is 10, then everything else is below 1. So all these other things, I mean, people talk about iron a lot, but you just don't need much. They made a whole industry out of selling iron, which, compared to everything else, you don't need a whole lot of iron. Of course, they did it with people too. They said, iron pills. You need a lot of iron. Well, you don't need that much. When you get down to molybdenum, it's 0.0003. Is what that plant needs. It's like zinc is 0.06. They said they cured a whole orchard of zinc deficiency by just hammering one galvanized nail into each trunk. So that's how little they need of certain minerals. But those are your main ones. Potassium, nitrogen, the big two. If you're in a pot, you need some phosphorus. In the ground, you just don't need it. Our soil has plenty of it.
So do you add fertilizer after you plant?
Yeah, generally the soil never has enough to support a plant. Now, commercially, Dave Wilson tells all their growers, first year in the ground, don't add anything. Don't fertilize at all. But what they want, because most farms it's so windy in farms because there's no buildings around, nothing. So they want to make sure those plants don't get too much of a canopy because they'll blow away in the wind. For most homeowners, it's not that big a deal. If your roots you don't get that much wind in your own garden that farms do. Farms are just whipped around. So they want to make sure the plants don't grow much the first year, just get roots going. But generally we do. Now at the nursery, we do Osmocote a lot. Osmocote is 15-9-12, so they're pretty accurate. This is the most widely used fertilizer in the horticultural industry. In the last 6 months, for an average fruit tree, you'd probably put around 2 capfuls in the hole when you plant it. So it's just simple and easy. Now, in the long run, organics are still better. This has 10 minerals in it. This will have every single mineral the plant needs. But this is pretty close. This, among chemical fertilizers, this is pretty darn close. So, and the ground does have a lot of these miners in enough. Like they say, iron. Very few soils don't have enough iron. You just have to adjust the pH so it dissolves properly. Yes.
Is that, smoke coated, is that organic?
No, not organic. So what you have to realize is this won't keep your soil fluffy and healthy, because there's a lot of things that live in the soil that need to eat this. So, you know, it is odd because the plant can't absorb any of this directly. Something's got to eat it up first, and then the plant gets it. So either a fungus or a bacteria or something's got to consume this, and then that, you know, if it's a protozoa, it's got to poop out, and then the plants get what it poops out. But and bugs can eat this too, and they'll poop out, and then the plants get some of that. So most of your organic stuff, unless, you know, if there's already organic material on the ground, it's still giving off nutrients, and you add this, you just add to that. But if you put this on a newly planted tree, it just doesn't work immediately. It might take a month to get going because something else has got to eat this first. Plants can't eat what's in here, whereas this can go right into the roots and they get an immediate effect the next day. That's why we like this. I mean, my daughter, when she first started working here, she was against the chemicals. So she put the organic stuff in her little plants that she pot up, and they wouldn't grow. So she's kind of gone back to this because it just takes a while for organics to start up. Now, there are different organics out there that work faster. So like fish works pretty fast. Fish emulsion, you know, it's so smelly, it's already been fermenting in that pot, or fermented before they put in the bottle. So that works pretty fast. And then a lot of the newer organic fertilizers, like we have this one, I didn't bring it up here, Dr. Earth Life in the dark green bag, that's already been fermented. So like we were next to an organic farm for 4 years, and whenever they fertilized their property, they used liquid stuff, and it smelled like a sewer, like you're standing in the middle of a sewer for a day, because they couldn't wait for these things to work. Their stuff, you know, their crops are quick. And they actually fertilize through their drip system. So everything they have is a liquid, smelly stuff that smells like a sewer. So, because it's already broken down. At that point, it's already broken down. It's ready for the plants to pick it up. Chicken manure works really well on a lot of things. Chicken manure is fast because birds poop chemicals. Their poop is almost pure chemical. So it's ready for the plants to use too. So
What about worm castings?
good for the soil, maybe not worth the price you're paying for it, but still good. And people use it not for nutrition as much as they do for bug control. There's some about worm poop that stops certain sucking bugs. We're not sure if it's truthful or not, but it seems to work. So, as far as how much water these things need, well, fertilizer-wise, you know, they always say it's a guessing game. We just don't know how much fertilizer the soil has in it at any particular point, or how much the plant's using. Agriculture, they can tell you how much per acre to apply. For homeowners, like, I don't know. If you have any big trees in your neighborhood within 100 feet, they're probably sharing your water and your fertilizer, which is always, you just don't know. It's always a guessing game. You go by what the plant looks like. If the leaves are deep green through and through, you're probably okay. If the center veins are turning light colored, you can probably use more nitrogen. The two plants you have to be careful not to overfertilize. Well, there's the stone fruit plants, you have to be careful not to overfeed them, because if you overfeed a stone fruit, if it's got too much nitrogen, put it that way, if it's got the nitrogen levels are too high, the fruit of the skin doesn't mature properly and they rot right as they're ripening. It's called brown rot on peaches, and especially nectarines get brown rot real easy. If there's too much nitrogen in the soil, they rot. Most other fruit trees don't seem to have that problem. Water-wise, generally if you've got a full-size, now all the research was done a long time ago on full-size trees. So on full-size fruit trees, say 15 foot tall and 10 foot wide, which was average size of an avocado or a citrus, 90-degree day in the summertime, figure they use about 50 gallons of water every day. 70% of the water in California that's stored behind the dams goes to farms, and that's why they use a lot of water. As far as we know, there's no drought-resistant fruit trees. If you want them to produce, you got to make sure the root system is not dry. Now, the roots on most fruit trees go down about a foot. So if you want to confirm that your fruit tree has enough water, you take a piece of rebar, which are usually a little thicker than this. Usually the thinnest rebar you can get is about pencil thick, 3/8-inch rebar at one of the hardware stores. And you walk around and see how far you can push it into the dirt. And generally, if dirt is moist, you can push objects through it. If it's dry, you cannot push an object through dry soil. It's like modeling clay when you're a kid. If it's wet, anything goes through it. If it's dry, nothing goes through it. Same with soil. So farmers used to walk around with a piece of rebar. They got the one that was shaped with the handle on the top. They're 4 foot long with a little handle. Push in the ground and see if they can get it in a foot. Now farms usually work with 1.5 feet of good soil, so they want to see if they can push it around 1.5 feet deep, and they were good. If you can push it in that far, in your own home, if you can't push it in 1 foot deep, you got up the water a little bit. Now with the rain we just had, it should be really easy to push anything in the ground 1 foot deep. When we used to have those El Nino storms, when we get 30 inches of rain, I can go in my backyard with a piece of rebar and push it in 4 foot deep. It was just crazy, and I had clay soil. So normally in the summertime, you couldn't push it more than 10 inches, but in that winter, right in the middle of my lawn, you can just stick it in there 4 foot deep. It was just amazing how wet the soil gets, and the plants just love that. Generally, if your soil is decent at all, you can't overwater anything. Too much water doesn't hurt anything but your billfold. So.
On avocado trees, when they get brown tips, does that mean underwater?
Well, two things cause brown tips: either no roots from bad soil conditions, or if the grower grew it in compost, you get all these brown tip leaves because the plant's got no healthy roots on it, or a lack of water. Chronic light, lack of water will cause brown tipping. A sudden just dryness, if the plant was getting plenty of water, won't turn the tips brown. Leaf just dries up, gets crispy. But yeah, chronic light, lack of water will cause brown tipping. But often it doesn't. We see more brown tipping from bad root systems than anything else.
Fix that? Is it just kind of amending the soil?
Well, a lot of trees will outgrow it. If you put it in, if it was in a 5-gallon bucket with bad soil around it, a lot of times when the roots grow out further, this becomes less of a problem. So. Okay, any other questions on fruit trees? So we'll cover each fruit tree in general starting in January, or each type of fruit tree in detail as we go through them in January. I'll have my list in next week's email if you get it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.